Hello and welcome to the latest Business of the Business podcast. I'm your co-host, JP John Paz from the Two-Man Power Trip. Of course, joining me, the doctor himself, Mr. Lavi Morgan. Lavi, how you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great. For our first half of today's podcast, we have an amalgamation, John. We have a John, but we also have a doctor. So, Dr. John, who will correct me on his last name, I hope I don't mess up, Dr. Jonathan Foye, really a triple cat crown of Purisu wrestling history.
So your pronunciation of my last name is much better than the actual name itself. It's Foye, not Foye, but you're not the first one to call it that. My friend Dave did. Leon, who I'm probably mispronouncing his name in turn. He called it Foye. And I'm like, yeah, that sounds better than the actual thing.
It sounds classy.
Now, John, I had obviously this is something different. We're going to be talking about Freedom and Faith Pro Wrestling Noah, Beyond the Green Mat. Tell us about this book, because you always have some great Japanese stuff. I know we've talked about Noah before, but man, this is some great stuff here. Tell us about this book and what's going on, and the Indiegogo campaign that just ended.
Man, first of all, thanks for having me on here. Yeah, great to be back on. And yeah, so this one, we just had the Indiegogo campaign wrap up. I think it was like the day before yesterday, and we got 285% of what we were aiming to make, which was pretty good. So basically, this one, the actual general release is happening in December, and it's the history, kind of the ups and downs and the turmoil that they had, and also just kind of with everything that happens with Noah, whether or not they reflect what Mitsuharu Misawa wanted from the company. That's kind of where I get the Freedom and Faith title from. Like, he had this notion of kind of, if you took responsibility for your actions and if you kind of wrestled in the way that you wanted to, you could do whatever you wanted to. And that meant, they left All Japan Pro Wrestling behind. They took big risks. They were responsible for themselves, and they did some crazy things at points in that company's history. And like asking questions of, does the company today reflect Misawa's legacy, and is this what he wanted for the company and stuff like that, and kind of looking at their whole history up till they returned to the Budokan in 2021. So really interesting people, some of the wrestlers past and present. Was pretty happy with how all that came out in the end, and really happy after all this time that things actually seeing the light of day after all this time.
Man, how do you feel about the campaign going way overboard? That's awesome. That's great support out there.
Yeah, that was great. With the way it kind of works, people in the US were the only ones that could really pick up a physical copy of the book. So I got a lot of people also saying, as soon as this is out in my part of the world, I'll get that print copy, because the artwork is really great. We had my Mashkila Muhammad did the artwork, and he did like the cover and the internal artwork, and I think that's kind of what makes a lot of people want the print copy of this thing. So it kind of affirmed for me that when you do something like this, really a pre-sale, it's good to kind of just sort of see if there's interest in it. That was really cool to see. Like, again, I've been sitting on this thing for a little while. When you write these things, it obviously takes a long time from where to go. So that was really cool.
To Curacao and kind of obviously become a huge fan. Were so much where you wanted to write about it.
Yeah, so I grew up here in the Blue Mountains in Australia, so I'm about an hour west of Sydney, and basically, like, pro wrestling, much like you guys experienced in the States in the 90s, it was huge here. It was huge at my school in the 90s with like the Attitude Era, WCW against NWO, all that sort of cool stuff. But and, you know, like sort of thing, situation where when a teacher ducks out of the room, the boys start putting wrestling holds on each other, and kind of got into the WWF that way. And there's also those video games, you know, the THQ games with like there was a WCW vs NWO Revenge, and you know the WWF Attitude from Acclaim and stuff like that. Really was my gateway drug into pro wrestling, and so dived right in, got into all the magazines and stuff like that. And they had obviously the Apta mags. We had one here that was kind of an Apta affiliate mag from Britain that they took a bunch of stuff from the Apta mags and reprinted it, and they were going into the split back then, you know, back in 2000. So I was reading about the old Japan split a few months after it was happening, and kind of also, you know, getting into wrestlers like Tajiri and people like that from Japan, who obviously they'd come from Japan. I knew there was some wrestling over there. Mick Foley talked about it in his book. Tajiri, I think, was a big one for me, and to hear that he'd gone back to Japan and was working there afterwards as well. But yeah, so all that kind of, you know, it's like anything else, you dive into it more and more. I'm sure you guys have had this experience. You can't really stop going down that rabbit hole. There's always more to learn about it. And yeah, eventually we had, I think especially with the lockdowns here during COVID, a lot of time on my hands. My wife just saying, you know, we've got time on your hands. You're talking about wanting to write a book or do something again like that. You're never going to have this time again. So that was where I tried to sort of try my hand at the first book, and kind of, yeah, fell further down the rabbit hole from there.
When you're looking at it, right, obviously Pro Wrestling Noah comes along after All Japan Pro Wrestling. Do you feel that Pro Wrestling Noah, there's more like substance there just because of what happened, and like the exodus, the mass exodus, it almost kind of makes it, just as far as like when we're fast forwarding here, it almost makes it more interesting as far as like, wow, Noah, yes, All Japan is epic and there's all, you know, the history there, but the exodus, I mean, that just makes it so intriguing. Like, what the hell?
Yeah, and it's also interesting because it's kind of like the majority of the roster from one company starting afresh somewhere else. So you've got this, in one way, it's very traditional, very old, and kind of the same people from the other company, but another way, trying new things, everyone doing different colors when they start, which is a huge no back in Barbers All Japan. And yeah, and it's just such a, like, that's the start. You're right. That's the start of the company, is there's a huge exodus. So it's dramatic from the get-go, their story, and it doesn't let up either. Like, their history from the start just has a whole lot of intrigue and things happening, and that doesn't stop really. Like, that, for anything you can say about them, they've constantly got big drama happening over at Noah.
Now, obviously, this isn't your first book about it either. So, I mean, there's a lot of meat on the bone. You know what I mean? Like, there's a ton out there on Pro Wrestling Noah.
There's stuff too that I kind of could have dug into and didn't a whole heap with this one. There's, you know, backstories to some of the individual wrestlers that would make good books by themselves, and things I've learned since I finished the book that I just had no scope to include. Like, there's just so much stuff to mine there.
Man, I love it. I love Pro Wrestling. Oh, I still have a bunch of the DVDs. I mean, I have a ton of stuff from Pro Wrestling. Oh, it's crazy how much stuff. Because over here in the States, we had a website where you could basically, I know obviously you could do the other websites as well, and tape trading and things of that nature. But we had actually like real deal wrestling sites over here, like High Spots and stuff, where we could order Pro Wrestling Noah pretty soon thereafter these big shows. So very familiar with it, and it's, I don't know, one of those like time capsule things. You're like, man, they were so good at that point, like the best almost, and maybe the biggest in the world at one point.
Yeah, so around, I think it was sort of 2004, 2005, when, you know, Japanese MMA was all the rage. The other companies in Japan were not doing so well at one point, and you know, New Japan had it was about a year to 2 years where Noah was more profitable than New Japan, and so they were the biggest wrestling company in Japan for a minute there, kind of thing. It didn't last, and you know, but they were running. They ran 2 Tokyo Dome shows year on year. They had kind of these big, crazy matches, and yeah, again, it was kind of a moment that could not last as far as their height, and it came at the expense of the other companies, and they defied gravity for a little while there too, as far as their popularity went. I don't think they've touched it since, but they've had moments. They had Keiji Muto's retirement a few years ago, had like 30,000 people in the Tokyo Dome, so they've had moments and things like that. But yeah, they were very popular at one stage.
Let me hand it over to Alavi. I know he's chomping at the bit.
So, John, I'm going to start off my portion by admitting something. I did not know until the last year that the NOAA stood for Noah's Ark. I just thought it was an acronym or something like that.
Oh my God.
Which is quite embarrassing after studying biblical study, going to private schools that were half traditional studies and half religious studies. I never made the connection, and then my mind was like, so in naming the book Freedom of Faith, and from what I gathered from your LinkedIn, you're a theologian yourself. Does that like further connect you to this? And like, are there sort of like, did you bake in like biblical elements and allegories into this book?
Yeah, so I was, until a year ago, I was the editor of the Uniting Churches magazine in New South Wales. So New South Wales and the AC, it's a publication that I worked there for, I want to say 7 years. And so that was what I was writing about. That was like, it was about religious affairs stuff. It was about theology. It was all that, everything that was happening with the church at the time. So that was my day job. So I can't ever get away from that completely, and I managed to get some wrestling coverage into it as well, like here and there, like they had, like the Iron Claw, when that came out, I did a review of that. Or when we had, like wherever I could justify it, basically I'd get some wrestling content here and there onto their website. So I can't get away from wrestling. I can't get away from theology, no matter what I try. So in this one, I was looking a little bit, like there's a tiny bit of theology in there as well, about kind of, the Noah's Ark story is kind of this one that they've taken, like with a lot of oral tradition, they take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, and they kind of put it all together in one volume kind of thing. And with that whole story, they've kind of taken a lot of the old one of the old Babylonian myths and of the Epic of Gilgamesh, and they've kind of retold that to tell their own story and make their own point, and to subvert the original story. So I kind of make a point in there about that, about how Misawa was kind of taking Giant Barber's style of wrestling and his viewpoint on wrestling, but making it very much his own and representing that in a different way. So I don't know if I'm reaching, but that's what came to my mind when I was looking at this story and when I was listening to what Misawa had to say. And and just like Misawa had to leave at one point, so did Baba at one point when Foye. And so that was interesting as well, like the parallels between these two men's lives. And kind of, I don't go a heap into the theology, but I do have little bits here and there because I'll never really be able to escape it. I've only really got one gear as far as that goes. So it'll always crop up somewhere in my work, I think.
Yeah, and talking about your other writing, I think every wrestling fan that has the privilege of conveying information to others, whether it's as a professor, writing a book or an article, whenever there's a chance to sneak in some wrestling, we always go for it. So in terms of different perspective, today, and I always mess up the name of Curacao, at least to me in North America, it seems to be at a low point in terms of interest. I'm not sure what it's like in Australia. I'd like to ask you about that in 1 second. But tying that in, I think AEW kind of like absorbed that like alternative. Like it was Kurosawa overall, certainly New Japan, Noah at certain times, All Japan at other times, like where people were like, I want the alternatives and it's going to come from here. But then when AEW came around, people were just like, okay, that's our alternative. What do you think of that?
I think the way AEW kind of works is they're the kind of more mainstream or the gateway drug to all of that stuff. They kind of are there for the Western fan to kind of connect them to bits and pieces that they may have heard about before. So as an alternative, they try to draw on, wrestlers from Mexico, wrestlers from Japan and stuff like that. But yeah, look, as far as the situation goes, I call it either Puro or ProRes. Trying to I met Minoru Suzuki years ago at his shop in Harajuku, and he was like, "Oh, so you like ProRes?" So I'm like, if he can call it that, that's what I'll call it too. But Purosu, I mean, however you want to pronounce it, it's one that I love, but it's definitely having a down point at the moment with the yen being pretty low, and with compared to that, I think a lot of Western wrestlers, especially, have more opportunity to earn more money in AEW or in America in general. So you're seeing a lot of talent, make its way there for that reason. And it's not like the dark ages of 2005 through 2011 or thereabouts when that those guys really struggled. But it's definitely a very trying period at this point. We'll see kind of how, for instance, I don't know how New Japan's going to go once Tanahashi retires. I don't know if Noah is going to be able to garner more popularity. It's always very tough for All Japan Pro Wrestling, though they've had some solid crowds. So was Noah this year too. They've managed to sell at Kurikan Hall a few times and stuff like that. But yeah, it's definitely not what it was like, in the 90s and the 2000s, like for Noah.
So with Noah having been acquired by Cyber Cyber Agent, I always thought of like Cyber Fight as like the sleeping gorilla in the industry. Prior to that, it was sort of like Sinclair Broadcasting. They own Ring of Honor. They have so much value if they were to invest more into it. Cyber Fight, the financials come out like every once in a while, and it seems like it's a very successful company, Cyber Agent, but Cyber Fight is a big money loser. So, like, how do you think Cyber Fight is positioned in the market? Noah within that, and like, are there prospects, or does it seem like there's interest in growing it, or just like keeping it out as it's going?
So it's interesting because like Cyber Agent, so the big overarching parent company, makes a lot of money. They're profitable no matter what. Cyber Fight, so the subsidiary that owns Noah, has been a money loser pretty much since they bought the company. But I don't think they're concerned like that because they make that much money from their other holdings that to have this one little division that isn't making them money doesn't seem to be a big concern for them. I think the main thing for Noah is it makes content for the streaming services that they have. So they have the Wrestle Universe and they have the Abema app, which is a partnership between Cyber Agent and Bushiroad, who own New Japan, and they also have a WWE content on there as well. So as long as they have the content for that and Noah keep making that for them, I don't think they're worried just as yet. And at one point, it looked like they were going to turn a profit. I think that was sometime in 2022 or 2023, and they ended up putting a lot of money instead into upgrading their website and into upgrading that streaming app. So, they've had times when they've consciously just stayed in the red. I think they probably take a long-term view of that as well. I'm sure that it can't go on forever not making money, but in the meantime, it seems they're okay with that. I don't think they made money off that alone. I think they've one holding among many. Again, I don't work for them, so I'm guessing based on what we've heard and the I hear from a few people that are closer to it, but that's kind of my view on all that.
With All Japan's financials, or at least I found them, and I know that you saw it from July. It looked like, and part of my class description, it looked like things were in the toilet, in terms of the money that they have on hand, the money that they lost, and so on. Beyond that, it's kind of a mystery to me of what's going on. Do you think All Japan is like less, sustainable, given that I think it kind of stands on its own now? You'll let me know. And do you think Cyberfight still has like a taste for acquisition, and this would be something they'd be interested in?
So it's interesting because All Japan, All Japan were profitable in 2020, for instance, because they invested in a monster movie at the time. And just when everyone kind of went out of the theater, people were hungry to go back to the movies, and that movie that All Japan invested in happened to be one of the few that was playing. So they made a profit that year off that kind of off of that investment. So yeah, this last year though, they were a little bit in the red. That hasn't been the case like every single year. Like they've had some profitable years, and it's one of the few self-contained wrestling companies, and it's largely off the back of their owner, who's also the president, and he invests a lot of his own money into the company and keeps that going a lot off his own back. I don't know how much longer he can do that, or if that's something he plans on doing long term, but he has hinted in a Tokyo Sports interview that he had acquisition talks with a few people. A few people were interested. He resisted it. He was apparently also in talks with, I never said like WWE by name, but he heavily alluded to it being WWE that he was talking acquisition with. But then the Vince McMahon stuff that happened, as far as the court case and everything else, that killed all of that. So there was apparently some talk about it happening. I would be quite curious as to if he would consider it again, if he would ever consider someone else buying him out. But it seems like he's personally invested in this and that he's passionate about it. So that's kind of hold on to it for now. Yeah, only company as far as the big wrestling companies in Japan go that is still kind of only owned by sort of, wholly owned, not owned by a big entity like that. I don't know if they would welcome acquisition, or if Cyber Agent would, or Cyberfight really would want to buy someone else at this point. But with wrestling, it's always so unpredictable as well, and you can never say no, that will never ever happen.
So, on writing books, especially, I believe the first couple were, self-published, which is my method as well. Like you kind of like work on something and you put it out into the world, and you never know what the reaction is going to be. So, like, what was that process like? How did you market them? And like, when did you know things were on the right track and it was going to be well received, both critically and financially?
So I think it was a matter of, I basically shopped this book to a few people, and it was very clear that it was a very niche little project that I had that no publisher really would necessarily be interested in at the size and at the scope it was at. So first up, I thought, to get it out, you pointed out there, like, if you want to get the thing published and you want to get it published quickly, self-publishing was the way to go. Like, not that I wanted to rush it, but you know what I mean? Like, to actually have it finished and then to be able to control the process of releasing it. That was why I thought of that for the first two. As far as kind of the success or any kind of thing like that, I was lucky because I had a few people review it early on who were pretty good about promoting that. So like Voices of Wrestling, the Eastern Lariat podcast, I was really lucky to, I had my interview with Fumi Saito in the first one, which kind of, that helped it a lot. So he put that out there a lot as well. As far as that goes, like it's that broke even. I paid for the artwork. I paid for like the editor that edited the first book and stuff like that myself to try to get something behind it. And that broke even about 3 or 4 months down the line. But yeah, it definitely hasn't, it's not been this hugely profitable thing. It was just something I loved writing and really enjoyed doing. And so getting it reviewed by different places. My second book was in the Observer list. I think it was 4 or 5 or whatever it was, but that was cool to see. You know, it's a little bit like this and that. I don't know if like that qualifies as success or whatever, but I don't know. I've just really enjoyed all that. Hopefully, having more people read the things. Yeah, we'll see kind of how this next one does, an actual publisher behind it, and hopefully gets everything kind of going again as far as people picking the thing up.
Yeah, and I had purchased Ganbaru. Hopefully, I'm not messing that name up, and it was a very enjoyable read. So thank you for your efforts on that. I'll have to catch up on the others. So of course there was the tragic death of Misawa, but in terms of not to gloss over that, but in terms of other points, sort of like to understand the business, were there like certain milestones like the outliers here in the U.S., right? Like the Von Erichs getting their head slammed Thanksgiving night, which created a huge business in Dallas, or the finger poke of doom in WCW killing the business. Like, what are the like financial touchstones as a result of creative processes in Noah? Sort of like, how did we get to where we are?
So, there's so much. But there's obviously there was kind of the big shows that they did in the Tokyo Dome. There was them struggling to make new stars after 2005. So they had Marufuji win the title, and so he became the GHC heavyweight champion, and then defended it against Kenta in the Budokan. But that show was disappointing from a financial and attendance kind of thing, so they had to get the belt back to Misawa pretty quickly after that. So that's an early indicator that they're going to struggle with making new stars and getting new people that then there's kind of this things like decision to have. So I'm jumping my timeline all around the place here. It's about a year earlier. I think there was a bit of a struggle because they had Kenta Kobashi's title reign end with him dropping the GHC heavyweight title to Rikio, and Rikio was a great wrestler, but he really struggled to come after Kenta Kobashi because how are you going to follow that up? That was a real struggle point for the company as well. You've got a few other things in terms of other things that lead to ups and downs, but nothing could be bigger than you hit the nail on the head, like Misawa's death in the ring. After that point, the company picks up for a little while because people want to come and support the company. But then, as Fumi Saito kind of described it, no one wants to see this wrestling thing and see their heroes die. If you see your hero die in the ring, that's a reminder that these people are human, and it's a reminder that there's a risk and a danger factor to what they're doing, and people didn't want that. So for a long time, Noah was down from that. They lost their TV deal about a year before that. So them being off Nippon TV was a huge milestone, sort of in 2009 that eventuated that they lost their time slot. The Yakuza scandal in 2013, where it was revealed they were selling tickets by giving tickets to Yakuza thugs, basically. And these Yakuza members would go to office blocks and offer to sell them to people and, very gently persuade them that it was in their interest to buy these tickets, like intimidate them to pick them up. So when that scandal broke in 2012 and 2013, that was a huge story. And that got them really well and truly out of negotiations to go back on TV. So things like that along the way, they've had a lot of dramatic ups and downs. And yeah, from a creative point of view, there's definitely been smaller decisions than that, but those are the big ones as far as that goes.
Why does Pro-Res and Yakuza in Japan go together like peanut butter and jelly?
So the broader history is the biggest star, or the original first star of Japanese pro wrestling, the guy that when the American promoters that made Japanese pro wrestling basically needed a star, they had a former sumo guy, and that was in Riki Dozan. And Riki Dozan was basically a former sumo who had connections to way back then in the 1950s and 60s, organized crime. He had kind of mafia people he knew. He had kind of relationships with people that were, you know, loan sharks and people that knew the Yakuza, and he knew a few Yakuza members himself and worked with them. So from the beginning, there was a little bit of that. And, you know, the structure of the early JWA relied on a few fairly shady people. It's not always intertwined with organized crime, but there's definitely been some times when they've been heavily involved. Some companies have been heavily involved with it, but it's definitely not like that on a mainstream level today. But, you know, small companies absolutely have ties sometimes to not great people. There's also a tradition of they will sell shows to promoters in small regional and rural towns whose job it is to organize and book these shows. And, you know, some people used to be Yakuza as well in these small towns, or just, you know, fairly aligned people like that. So, you know, there's definitely some stories up and down of different companies over the years having fairly tight money issues, and it was one avenue to go to for that. So it's been intertwined in the wrestling industry since it began there, really, at one point or another. It's not, you know, the big force behind their funding or whatever, but it's definitely one feature of the overall overarching business story there, really.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. So my last question before turning it over to John um, may be related. Just in reflection, I'm not sure if you're an MMA person as well, especially a number of years ago when it seemed sort of more intertwined, especially in Japan. But right, the UFC bought Pride, who was tied into Yakuza scandal, and they spent like a tremendous amount of money, and it like never, you know, they could never get it off the ground in Japan. Is doing business in Japan so different that it's quote unquote like impossible for an American company to be established there? Do you always need partnerships in Japan? Why is that?
So from a legal standpoint, it's it's not impossible, but it's difficult for a non-Japanese person to buy a Japanese company. Like by law, it's just very, very difficult. It's happened though. There were a few big acquisitions this year, but generally speaking, you would need some Japanese people on the ground. The other thing is a lot of you know, Japanese people typically know, certainly in Tokyo at least, certainly know more than one language, certainly have a very good grasp of English. But the norm there is that business is conducted in Japanese. So from the very get-go, it's not exactly easy for an outside company to make their way in. So there's all that. Plus, you know, there's always been rumblings about WWE wanting to buy a Japanese company. And, you know, I've heard that rumor recently even. And it's, you know, they recently had their show at the Rio Goku, you know, at the Sumo Palace, and the place was maybe half full. You know, it's not as big there as it used to be, even. So I don't think for an outside company to buy a Japanese company always makes that much financial sense. I think it probably makes more sense for them to, you know, like you mentioned, like for them to partner with someone there that knows the business and that they can work with. I think definitely there's been attempts at different points to get something started. The plan for instance, WWE wanted an NXT show in Japan years ago, but the plan was always for them to have like a reality TV show where they would get some of their NXT prospects into the Pro Wrestling Noah dojo. So yeah, even that was different than a lot of people think, you know, what NXT Japan would look like.
Thanks. Turning it over to John.
All right, John, give us one last big push for the book. Obviously, Freedom and Faith, Pro Wrestling Noah Beyond the Green Mat, where they can get it and why they should get it.
So obviously we've been very lucky with how the whole Indiegogo campaign happened. So now the next part is the thing will be available for general release in December. And basically that one is one that if you've got any interest in Japanese pro wrestling, if you're interested at all in even just a story about kind of people that took things into their own hands and took big risks. It's a very dramatic, overarching story that has a lot of different elements to it. I got very lucky with the people that helped me with that as well. The artwork is really, really great. Like not just the cover, which is great, but also the internal art to this one is fantastic as well. So I got to defer to other people on that in terms of some of the people I got to speak to as well. Like I interviewed Marufuji, Sugira. I was lucky enough to interview, as far as people that used to work there, Mike Modest, who wrote a really good forward for the book as well. So anyone that knows the film Beyond the Mat from 1999 knows Mike Modest and how great his whole thing was. He had some fantastic stories for this one. Some of them, there's a guy that if you can get him on any of your shows, I recommend it because he has some great stories from his time over in Japan as well. I was really lucky to get him. So those stories are in there as well. Plus, there are a few others that I couldn't fit in there, but like that he told me about. So yeah, just people like that. It's a chance to spend some time with them, really.
Love it. Where can everybody find and follow you as far as social media is concerned?
So I'm on Twitter, probably too much for my own good, but X, Twitter, I still call it Twitter. It's hard to take that as a name, but Jonathan is my name, and same on Blue Sky. And apart from that, my books are available on Amazon. So there's obviously Ganbaru and the Muto Years, which is about Keiji Muto's time running All Japan Pro Wrestling. As far as interesting times in the business and tough business, that goes into that as well.
All right, John, thank you so much. Appreciate all the time this morning, or actually,
Appreciate
I guess
you guys,
at night for you.
Thanks again.
Yep. Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Thanks, John. Get some sleep. Have a good night.
Thanks. Thank you.
All right. Let's talk a little Vince Russo. Let's talk about the big news here. Russo is back in wrestling and he's in JCW with the Clowns. What is going on here, love? You got to explain.
Yeah, just when we thought we were taking a break from JCW news as they transitioned away from their feud with GCW, they pull a rabbit out of the hat from the legendary Vince Russo returning. So Vince Russo returns to wrestling at JCW Lunacy taping in Denver. In a move that has stunned fans and insiders like legendary wrestling personality Vince Russo made his surprise return to wrestling world at large at the taping. Known for his controversy, Russo appeared during the taping in a segment that immediately has the world buzzing. His involvement marks a new chapter, which has been gaining momentum in its Lunacy series. I'm back. If you thought JCW was wild and unpredictable before, you haven't seen anything yet. So I think it's actually a really smart move. JCW needs attention. It's already wild and unpredictable and out of control. So you have that environment, you're not going to break it. Vince Russo is very creative in that way. And maybe, John, remember of course you remember, but the rebranding back from Impact to TNA and the impact that had, no pun intended. What if Russo is like, instead of Juggalo Championship Wrestling, and pardon my language, it becomes Juggalo Champion Shit Wrestling again. Back at the VHS tapes and all that.
It's funny. People go, "Oh, nobody cares," and all blah blah blah. Yet they're talking about it and saying nobody cares while they're bringing it up, and so obviously it did generate some news, and people were caring, even though they were saying the opposite while talking about it. So interesting the way that kind of worked out.
Yeah, and of course, through our networks, we have many lines of communication opening. Vince Russo is a frequent guest on your programs, John, but we're also planning to hopefully have some representation from that side. Prior to Thanksgiving, we're working on that, and that will be a different perspective that we can share. And from a business perspective, we don't know yet if it's storyline or if it's a factual business, but Russo posted that he has invested in JCW, so that's an interesting thing as well.
Bro, I'm an investor now, bro. But let's talk about another maybe crazy former I guess, owner, whatever you want to say, investor in a company. What about XPW and Rob Black? What is the latest with that?
Yeah, so XPW has not promoted for a little bit more than a year. I looked it up quietly. They had for about 4 years put on a number of shows. I remember when we started, that was, I think, something that we covered in our first year, but it might relate to why they're not or may not. But this is an article from the LA papers. A fan files suit against wrestling organization for injury sustained during Halloween event. So I guess very thematic today. A man is suing XPW and the former owners of the now closed Airtel Plaza and Conference Center in Van Nuys, contending he was injured by a large steel object allegedly thrown by wrestler Maga Butcher during the Halloween in Hell 4 event at the hotel. Pasha Gonzalez's Van Nuys Superior Court lawsuit against defendant XPW, Rob Black, and OLS Hotel and Resort. Gonzalez's suit alleges battery, negligence, premises liability, negligent hiring, supervision, and retention, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. Gonzalez seeks unspecified compensatory and punitive damages. OLS is now known as Springboard Hospitalities, and a Springboard representative cannot immediately be reached, nor could a spokesman for Black. Who would be Rob Black's spokesman? The Airtel Plaza closed earlier this month. Gonzalez attended the Halloween in Hell 4 on October 29, 2023, and paid about $255 for 2 front row tickets. The wrestling ring was surrounded by 6-foot steel barricades that were not secured, could be disconnected by performers, and were 5 feet from where Gonzalez sat at the suite states. Despite the inherently dangerous nature of professional wrestling, defendant Black failed to provide any security personnel. During Maga Butcher's competition in the ring, the wrestler disconnected one of the steel barricades and threw it towards Gonzalez and other spectators, hitting the plaintiff in the face and immediately knocking him unconscious. When the plaintiff regained consciousness and sought help, the hotel staff refused to provide assistance and stayed in the hotel, wanting nothing to do with the incident. Gonzalez spoke with Black, who instead of offering medical assistance, told the plaintiff he could have 2 free tickets to the next wrestling event. The suit alleges Gonzalez ended up getting his own medical care by dialing 911, which further states that Gonzalez has suffered lost income and emotional distress. Unfortunately, sounds like a wrestling story. Don't know any of the facts, but no reason to believe it's untrue, and sounds like quite a disappointing incident. Thankfully, that was not more tragic. I guess just dissecting it from a business perspective, have no idea what Rob Black is doing now. When it was last reported, well, no, I might be mixing him up with Ian Rotten. I think somebody was working in a fast food place. Of course, Black has all that history of incarceration, elements related to his former pornography business, all that sort of thing. So interesting to see how that plays out, and seemed like an outlier event. There's no excuse for it, but at wrestling indie shows in the front row, it could be dangerous. The one that I went to in Yonkers, a little girl was hurt momentarily, sitting in the front row. She was fine, and she was the daughter of one of the performers. So obviously, that incident didn't go on, but the ECW fire incidents, all that sort of thing. There's a history to it in commission states. That's another point for regulation and close oversight.
What is going on with the Wrestling Open right now?
So quietly, as IWTV and Wrestling Open doesn't get as much attention as it used to, they reached their 200th episode milestone. Wrestling Open celebrated 200 consecutive Thursday night events streaming live on IWTV. This one returning to the White Eagle. Wrestling Open, let's see here. This special occasion marks the return, the beloved venue where it began following a 9-month run at the Electric Haze. Founded in January 2022, Wrestling Open began as an open mic night for independent wrestlers looking to establish themselves and gain valuable ring experience. Over time, the concept evolved into a cornerstone of the scene. Rivalries naturally developed from the initial series of exhibition matches, and that completely changed the nature of the program, explained Drew Cordero. The wrestlers still signed to compete each week, but now they're incentivized by the special relationship they built with the fans since there's a lot more at stake. Regarding the move back to White Eagle, honestly, it's bittersweet since I love being at Electric Haze. I wish we could run 2 weekly shows. We're fortunate that our fans in Woodchester will follow us no matter where we go, but the size of the room at White Eagle can better accommodate large crowds, and the bigger audience, the more people we get to share our passions. White Eagle has hosted hundreds of wrestling events and classic matches. I didn't look at the results yet, but some names on the card that took place as we're recording this, I believe, last night. Bobby Orlando, Gabby Forza, Wheeler Yuta, Josh Alexander, Joseph Alexander, and Tyree Taylor and Bear Bronson.
What is going on with the NWA? What's the latest on them? What is going on in Billy Corrigan's world? No Russo, obviously. What's going on with NWA?
Yeah, and interesting. I didn't follow that that hint that it was going to be the NWA. Totally missed that element. Things were a little bit busy at work, so it was only retroactively that I learned that Russo's hints were directed towards that to create a swerve, bro. So just a quick note on the NWA that they're coming back to WEDU PBS Studios. As you told me, John, that they're still running tapings that are prior to the title changing hands. So they're going to need to refresh things soon, I'd imagine. The PBS studios seem to make total sense. It's great that they have access to that. So that's really the NWA news this week.
How about NXT? They've seemed like they've got a bunch of shows coming up.
Yeah, so just like to give us a little bit of flavor, which we've been talking about a little bit more, the Florida events, which are harder to track, the lower profile ones, but when they got on the road and they have those specials, those are some things to look into. Halloween Havoc, which took place on the 25th, through 2,595, which is always interesting. I feel like NXT's support of TNA pushes TNA higher, but NXT's flagship shows are kind of at a lower level than that. Now, in terms of a triple shot weekend, as it's a couple weeks ahead of us, St. Paul, that's looking really good at the Roy Wilkins Auditorium, 2,704 tickets distributed. They'll probably, number of seats on the map, so a potential of 4,209. I'd assume that they're going to open that up wider beyond their setup of, well, actually, they're almost there with nearly 4,000 tickets open. The next day in Green Bay, 1,250 tickets. And the Aragon Ballroom in Chicago, 713 tickets. In New York on the 18th, I'm a little bit surprised given the promotion that they haven't popped higher than this yet. Still time, 1,694 tickets. It's a busy week in New York, right? Busy TKO week, UFC, Monday Night Raw, and NXT. Are you considering any of those, John?
I was considering going to do Raw, but it was just the price of the ticket was just a little too high for my liking.
Yeah, I'm thinking about. I definitely could go to them all. I'm thinking about each one sort of has its intrigue to me. It just happens at work that Tuesday the 18th is like a busy day for me. It's when we have our internship fair, and I'm like the main point person for that. My son refers to it as the day Daddy wakes up at 5 a.m. So I don't know if I'll be like falling asleep at NXT, if I should be out late at Raw. The UFC, if the ticket prices come down last minute. I'm definitely curious about all three.
Speaking of NXT, though, what about TNA? What's going on with them?
So one of the interesting points is Orlando at Full Sail. I would have assumed that, it's I think it's like 400 tickets, that, all those would be gone very quickly. Some are moving better than others, but just an example, which is the lowest selling of the triple shot. November 13th, 2 weeks out, you could still get front row tickets together. Very light amount of sales so far. some in the front row, some in the second, depending on what's been on sale, some in the third that have been removed. But most of the tickets still available for that. Just to look at one night in El Paso via WrestleTix, 812 tickets distributed with a current setup of 2177. And should there be a surprise or momentum, they can accommodate a lot more than that at the El Paso County Coliseum.
What about New Japan Pro Wrestling in New Jersey? Is there any sort of update from that? Are they having strong sales? Are they having decent sales? What's the latest on New Japan in New Jersey?
They're off to a start. So we'll have to see how that moves along. 584 tickets in 2783 setup, which, John, it's about 8,000 seats that they can accommodate, maybe a little bit more.
Oh, wow. Okay. So it's one of those things where, yeah, because I've been there. It's about, I think, 7,000 or 8,000 seats. So they're putting up 2,000. So that's whatever. So they only sold 500. So it's like a very small percentage of the building right now is going to be sold. So it might just be the floor, if you will. Hopefully not, but it might just be.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where first they expect the brand to sell, which is quite diminished, in terms of North America, especially East Coast, New York, New Jersey, whatever. And the talent announcements usually come later because that's just the way it's done. I guess we should have asked Jonathan about that at the beginning, but I don't know. It's gonna be a tough one. I would predict maybe 1,500 tickets sold. What do you think, John?
That's what I was going to guess. Maybe 2,000 if they're lucky, or if, maybe they have some sort of like Moxley's going to be there, or Mercedes Moné, or, throw out a big name from AEW, or just a bigger name and maybe get up to 2,000. But I'm hoping so. I know it's only, 500, 600 tickets so far, but and we're only in October here, or November, basically. So hopefully it gets there by February, but I don't know. Looking a little shaky, a little rocky.
Yeah, I guess there's just something to being in America. Maybe it sounds good for shareholders, and sort of somebody had some interesting insight, sort of like diversify revenue, even if perhaps potentially it's a money loser to run in the US.
So let's wrap this bad boy up and head towards the plugs. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram at 2Man Power Trip. How about you, Lavi?
Follow me on Twitter, X, Lavimarg, LAVIEMARG. Check out my long form articles on lioncubjobsearch.com, and also interviewing advice. The LinkedIn group keeps growing. We want to keep it out there. The business of the business, pro wrestling jobs, etc. You'll be able to find it. And please like, share, rate, review. We have so a good amount of momentum going. We want to get it going more. Maybe even if we grow enough, maybe we'll do more than once a week, but it has to make sense for everyone, including our families, to have that trade-off. So we'd love to do it more, but we need more visibility and more support.
All right. Thank you, Lavi. Thank you, everybody out there. We'll see you right back here next week for a little business of the business. We'll see you next week, folks.